I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to talk about a specific person's chart, enable you to better learn Vedic astrology. I'm going to be going over this chart in detail and pointing out specific things to enable you to learn. So with that, I'd like to be talking about who's in the news, people that are in the news, because their lives are brought to our focus and everyone wants to learn something about them. So the chart that I'm using today to teach you to learn Vedic astrology is Roger Moore. And everyone knows Roger Moore was the 007. Of course, he was the replacement for Sean Connery, but he actually did more of the 007 movies than anyone, and he was always in the public eye. And his chart is very, very interesting in terms of explaining a lot of the principles in Vedic astrology that you are here to learn. So Roger Moore was an actor. Roger Moore had fame, money, great looks, and this is something that can be revealed very easily by analyzing his chart. So let's put his chart up here, and I'm going to start with the birth data that I used for his chart. So Roger Moore was born October 14th, 1927, and the time I'm using is 12:45 a.m., so it's 00:45 in London, England. And looking at his chart, he has Cancer as his ascendant, or as we call it in Vedic astrology, the Lagna. So his Lagna is at 26 degrees, 57 minutes of Cancer. And the moon becomes vitally important because it is the ruler of the chart, and wherever the moon goes, this will depict so much about who he is and what he's here to do. So the moon is with Rahu, and moon Rahu can be extremely intense because the moon is the mind. And when you have it with Rahu, it intensifies everything. And sometimes it can make it a bit extreme and sometimes over the top. Moon being the mind, Rahu is extremes. It can make people compulsive and obsessive at times. In the 11th house, the 11th house is the house that deals with friends, groups, organizations. But when you have Rahu in the 11th house, it means that you know and you run into somehow, some way, very influential people. And come to discover that Roger Moore was introduced to directors in the film industry through his father. And what's interesting is his father was a policeman in London. And when we start to look at variables, which we will go through for indicators of the father, it's actually here in terms of who his father was and what he did. But being moon Rahu in the 11th house, one of his wives was a socialite, very, very wealthy socialite, and this would depict what we're seeing with the 11th house, the moon with Rahu in the 11th house, and it is in Taurus. The moon is in the nakshatra Rohini, and I like to look at the nakshatras because they really bring home some in-depth meaning. But when we look at the moon being in Taurus, it is exalted in the sign. Exalted means more powerful. So to have the ruler of the chart, because and I say the ruler of the chart is a planet that rules the ascendant, the Lagna, because moon rules Cancer. That planet as ruler of the chart being exalted in Taurus and conjunct Rahu. Rahu expands things. Rahu makes things more exaggerated. This is an indication of a life of prominence. A life where he gets to explore the beauty and the luxuries of life. I say that because Rohini is the nakshatra that deals with luxuries, wealth, the best of the best. And it's extremely sensual. This is the nakshatra of sensuality. When you learn about the nakshatras, you learn that Rohini was the nakshatra that the moon wanted to spend more time in, and the other nakshatras became jealous. But there's a reason why. Of course, it had to do with the sensuality. That's what this myth was here to tell us, how important the moon is when it's in the sign of Taurus. And the sign Rohini. Rohini is all about sensuality. It's all about quality and good things in life. And of course, he got to explore and be a part of this, looking at this chart. So then I want to look at the reason why I often say Cancer as an ascendant, Cancer as the Lagna, is one of the most powerful ascendants to have. And that's based on the fact that Mars becomes what we call the Yoga Karaka planet. Mars is the most important planet for Cancer ascendant. Why? Because of the houses that it rules. Mars rules the 10th house and Mars rules the 5th house. The 5th house being a triconal house, the 10th house being an angular house or a Kendra. Kendras are the strongest. They're 1, 4, 7, and 10. So these are the houses of power, the houses of luck and comfort and positive results are the triconal houses, which is 1, 5, and 9. So the first house gets to be both, a Kendra and a triconal. But whenever you have a planet that rules a Kendra and a triconal, this creates what we call Raja Yoga. So Mars, all by itself, because it rules an angle and a trine, becomes the Yoga Karaka planet, which means it creates Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga, by the way, is when a planet rules, or two planets come together that bring together the rulership of a trine and an angle. And when I say angle, I mean a Kendra. That's a term that I interchange a lot. Kendra and angle mean the same thing. But a triconal, remember, our house is 1, 5, and 9. And an angle is 1, 4, 7, and 10. When planets come together that rule, each one of them brings together the Kendra and the other one brings the triconal, Raja Yoga. Raja means king. So this is a yoga that produces kings. So in this case, for everyone that has Cancer as their ascendant, Mars becomes Raja Yoga status all by itself by the fact that it rules the 5th house, a triconal, and the 10th house, an angle. So wherever Mars goes is going to be powerfully placed. And I notice it's in his 3rd house. The 3rd house deals with arts, entertainment, crafts, communications. But what many don't realize is the 3rd house is our house of creativity. So it's being creative and expressive because it deals with communications. And when you look at Mars being in the 3rd house, you realize and you recognize that this can deal with some specific talent. Now, the other aspect of this is that Mars, remember, rules the 10th, but it also rules the 5th. And the 5th house is also a house that is defined as a house of creativity, of self-expression. So whenever someone has a connection between the 5th and the 3rd house, by the fact that Mars rules the 5th and is in the 3rd house, this is all about an artistic, creative person, or someone that has a need to truly, truly express themselves in a big way. Now, Mars is also, by the fact that it is at 29 degrees of Virgo, this is conjunct the fixed star Spica. Spica is 29 degrees of Virgo, and Spica is that lucky star that I've often talked about that reveals luck, talent, and an overnight sensation. Many, many actors and actresses have Spica relevant in their chart. So his Mars, ruler of the 5th and the 3rd, conjunct Spica, he's a star, a major movie star. And not only that, he does have the sun very close to Mars. And the sun rules the 2nd house by the fact that sun rules Leo, and it's in the 3rd house. His money is made through arts and entertainment by being in the 3rd house. So this is vitally important. And let me give you a little bit of background about Roger. Roger is an only child, Mars being in the 3rd house, because Mars is the Karaka for siblings. It is all by itself, represents brothers and sisters. In the 3rd house, it can cause problems for brothers and sisters, but the fact that he doesn't have any is what this Mars is depicting. But also, when you think about Mars, think about how he is an actor, and you know where he wanted to go. First of all, when he first started going to school, and high school and college, he went to art school. So he wanted to be an artist, a painter, a drawer. He wanted to be in the field of art. But somehow, because of his father, who is a policeman, and let me just tell you, Mars can represent police, and Mars is about weapons, knives, war, but it can represent police. And Mars is very close to the sun. The sun is the Karaka for the father. So Mars with the sun can represent something to do about the father. The father was a policeman, or it could have been that his father was in the military, something to that effect, dealing with Mars energy. And by Mars being in the 3rd house, it is casting its rays to the 9th house. The 9th house in Vedic astrology is the father. And sometimes we look at the 10th house as the father. It can go back and forth. And I believe both houses can be reminiscent of the father. So Mars actually rules the 10th house, but it aspects the 9th house by opposition, and it is conjunct the sun, revealing about his father being in the armed forces, being a policeman. So it was that his father was called to do an investigation. And this is how his father came in contact with a director, a movie director, and this was the start of how Roger got his foot in the door. But from art school, from there, Roger went into the very prestigious Royal Academy of Drama in London. So he was a very well-trained actor. He had the courses, the classes, he did it all. But he was an incredible creator. And I'll tell you another reason how you could tell that he was an actor. And that is by looking at Venus. Venus is 18 degrees of Leo. And Venus is in the nakshatra of Purva Falguni. This nakshatra is probably the most important nakshatra to look for in terms of people being artists or being in the performing arts. This nakshatra has an enormous need to express itself. They have to express themselves in some way. And that's what Purva Falguni does. You will find that many singers, actors, people who write, draw, create, artists have this nakshatra extremely strong, but I've found this to be in the performing industry the most frequented nakshatra in famous artist actors charts. So Venus is in his second house, and the second house is our voice, but it is also our face. It's the face. So if you see planets in the second house, it can actually show how a person looks. And I have to say, Roger Moore was very handsome, very pleasing in his face, because Venus is here, and Venus being in the sign of Leo, I mean, Leo is notorious for their hair because of the mane of the lion. And Roger Moore had great hair, handsome face, but very refined. And I think the refinement comes from the fact that Neptune is also in the second house with Venus. Neptune is very much referred to as the higher octave of Venus. It's like a Venus on steroids, if I might say. So to bring these two together, in the house that depicts his face and his voice is fluid, his voice is smooth, beautiful, as well as his looks and his face and his demeanor. This is Venus Neptune in the second house of the face. And of course, the second house deals with money and finances. He was a multimillionaire due to his good, suave looks and for his acting ability, Venus being in the nakshatra Purva Falguni. So let us continue on to where we're looking at. And another thing I failed to mention about that Mars being 29 degrees, it is in the nakshatra Chitra. Chitra is the bright shining jewel. And people with this nakshatra stand out in a crowd. They glow. They're charismatic. So that's another reason that we've got this person as a powerful movie star. So looking at, let's move on to the fact that his moon is so powerful in Taurus. So you want to always look at what planets rule what signs they're in, what planets they rule, because going to where the moon is, being in Taurus, its dispositor goes to where the sun is and where the Venus is, because we're looking at Venus which is ruler of Taurus, okay? So that's what I'm seeing here, that because of the moon being in Taurus, Venus becomes an important variable reflective of the moon, and it goes to the second house of money, and it also will represent his good, suave looks. So Roger Moore had quite an issue in relationships, married 4 times, and it was also revealed that his wives abused him. I mean, this is usually the other way around, but in this case, it was spoken of that his wives would scratch, punch him, and scream and yell at him, and one even broke a guitar over his head. And so he was married 4 times. This is not a great chart for relationships. So when you are analyzing relationships, we must always look at where the ruler of the 7th house goes in a chart. So the ruler of the 7th, meaning Saturn, goes to the 5th house, and the ruler of the 7th and the 5th is not good for relationships. Don't ask me why, it's just a rule. It's not notoriously good for relationships. And Saturn is conjunct K2. This is so difficult. K2 is losses. And when it's with the ruler of the 7th, there's losses, there's problems, there's issues. And the fact that this Saturn K2 is 7th from the moon represents deep issues and problems in marriage, losses. So always remember to look from the 7th placement from the moon to get a deeper sense of what relationships, how they will transpire in life. This is important. And of course, the Navamsa chart. You got to look at the Navamsa. The Navamsa, the D9 chart. Remember, in parentheses, it says spouse. There's a reason. You must analyze this chart in terms of looking at the future spouse of an individual. And if you go to his 7th house in his Navamsa chart, take a look at that. Sun, Mars, Rahu, debilitated Venus in Virgo, and Uranus. This is a very difficult Navamsa for marriage. He was married 4 times, and his wives abused him. They beat him. They yelled at him. He had major issues with marriage partners. It's all here in the Navamsa. So, this chart really gives the sense of problems through marriage and children, because his wife that he had 3 children with, he left her for a very, very multi-million-dollar socialite, Danish socialite, and his children refused to speak to him after that. With Saturn K2 in the 5th house, he was devastated. He loved his children, and they refused to speak to him, so he was lost and hurt. Wherever K2 is in a chart represents where something's always missing, where you feel a loss, a drain, a void, an emptiness. And K2 with Saturn in the 5th house represented his loss and emptiness he felt by the isolation and separation from his children. So, one thing that I think is very important that must be analyzed in this chart is the 4th house. The 4th house, did you know that the 4th house is the house of happiness? Yes, because the 4th house deals with family and security. If you don't have family and you do not have security, you will not be happy. Bottom line. It gives contentment, a feeling of connection, wholeness, security. Looking at the 4th house, he has Mercury there. And Mercury, by the fact that it rules the 12th house, in the 4th house can represent losses around the home and family. But did you know the 12th house deals with foreign lands and countries? When the ruler of the 12th is in the 4th, it can mean that you live in a foreign land and country than the place you were born. He lived all over the world. He had 4 houses all over the world. And there were some problems with these homes. It was known that he owed taxes in England for property. And he traveled and ignored that all over the world. But the main issue why the 4th house is problematic is because, take a look, Mars, Sun in the 3rd house, Saturn K2 in the 5th house surround the 4th house. This is called Papakatari. Papakatari means hemmed in by malefics, malefic planets. And he has double whammy on both sides, Sun, Mars, Saturn, K2. They surround and they hem in the 4th house and planets in the 4th house, which in this case are Mercury. Mercury is the thinking mind. He had no peace of mind. He struggled. And thinking about this, when a house or a planet is hemmed in, it's like it's strangulated. They call it it's sandwiched in. Papa Katari means scissors. Scissors. Papa is bad. Katari means scissors. So it's got this cut. It's scissored in. And this is a problem. So everything about home, family, security was robbed from him and his peace of mind. Pay attention, look for these type of yogas. It's called a yoga, Papa Katari. So also thinking about the only planet we haven't analyzed in great detail is Jupiter. And Jupiter is in the 9th house. The 9th house is the house of Bhagi-bhava, which means a house of luck and fortune. And his Jupiter was phenomenal. It's in its own sign, Pisces, and it's with Uranus. He traveled the world. The 9th house is long journeys, distant travels. With Uranus, sudden unexpected trips and journeys all over the world. Then looking at Jupiter, Jupiter is an aspect to the Sun, Mars. So by its casting its light, it empowers these houses. And Jupiter is casting an aspect by opposition to the Mars Sun, and it's casting a trine to Saturn. Now let me explain planets' aspects. In Vedic astrology, those that know Western, this square chart, it goes clockwise. The planets travel clockwise in forward direction only. So if you count from Jupiter to where Saturn is, Saturn goes 9 placements. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And a trinal aspect is when a planet, but particularly Jupiter's full-bodied aspect, is a trine when it's 5 placements or 9 placements. This is 120 degrees. So this is a trine. Jupiter empowers the planets it trines. And this empowers Saturn. And Saturn being in the 5th house of creativity and talent, Jupiter imbued that. But remember this, that the 5th house is called the house of Puva Punya. And what that means is past life good credit that's due in this lifetime. And what I depict as that is talent. So those that have talent, this comes from a past life, and the 5th house will be relevant, telling you what talents a person has. And he has great talent in the field of acting, and Jupiter empowers that all the more by its trinal aspect to the Saturn and the 5th house in and of itself. So looking at his chart, I want to go over a timeline using the dashas. So it was from 1973 to 1985 that he played the legendary role of James Bond 007. And during this time when he started playing this legendary role, he was in Jupiter's Mahadasha, Moon Bhukti. And if you will look from where Jupiter is, Jupiter's about luck and fortune. It's ruler of the 9th and the 9th. And if you will count to where the Bhukti planet is, remember the Bhukti is the sub-cycle planet, and the Mahadasha's grand cycles last for a long time, but the Bhukti is going to tell you what is going on, the sub-cycle. So Jupiter, Moon, count from where Jupiter is to the Moon. 1, 2, 3. So the Moon goes to the third placement from Jupiter, reflecting 3rd house qualities, acting, career in acting, creativity. The Moon is exalted in Taurus, and it's conjunct Rahu. So it's off the charts. It's magnified. And sometimes Rahu can represent fame. So Moon with Rahu is major fame, and this is when this all came together. And the 11th house is the house of great gains. So he became rich, famous. He was already rich and famous, but this took it to the next level, Rahu. And you know, the Moon being exalted here can bring great wealth. An exalted Moon in the 11th house with Rahu depicts great, massive wealth for this individual. So then I'm looking at he enjoyed before this, and he was still in the Jupiter Mahadasha, a television career. And his television career from 1958 to 1972, he was in major television series. He was a major movie star. He was in Maverick and The Saint. He was the main character in The Saint. And this went on for years. And he was, you know, well known all over for this lead role in this most popular TV series at the time. So looking at from when he went into his Saturn Mahadasha, this was from 1978 to 1996. And during this time, he went through all of the problems in these turbulent marriages. Look at the planets. Saturn's ruler of the 7th with K2, and it goes 7th from the moon. Of course, Saturn's Mahadasha was going to be full of relationship problems and issues. So that's where he became divorced many times, and that was where his children refused to speak to him, and this broke his heart. So he went into Mercury's Mahadasha from 1996 to the year of 2013. Remember, his Mercury is Papakatari. Just looking at this, you wouldn't quite understand why this was the time that he reverted from the world and pretty much quit all the acting. I mean, he did some parts, but nothing like before. Because the Mercury is hemmed in, that's why this Mercury Mahadasha had the effects that it did. During his Mercury Mahadasha, he became involved with the humanitarian effort UNICEF. UNICEF is a humanitarian charity that helps impoverished children around the world. And he said that this was the best part of his life, his crowning glory. And if you'll note, Mercury does rule the 12th house of charities, and it's in the 4th house. And this is a powerful placement. This is where this all came out. And I must say, for him to be involved in such an important charity, and he involved his whole life in this, that is a remedial measure for his Saturn K2, taking care of children. His Saturn K2 in the 5th house. Remember, the 5th house has these two staunch malefics, and he actually followed the path of where he should to be a remedial measure to heal the issues around children. It was in 2013 that he went into his K2 Mahadasha. K2 is endings. K2 is spirituality. It's when we revert beyond this world. And his health started to really decline at this time, which he has just passed away recently in May of 2017. And when he passed away, he's 89 years old. He had his family surrounding him in his bed, and he found the peace and the love and the comfort, and his children, they were all by his bedside. He had a peaceful transition from this world, and his children all came back to him and loved and adored him. So this came full circle from a man that you can see in this chart is a major movie star, glamour, beauty, wealth, everything the world could give in terms of material desires, fame and fortune. I mean, the Neptune is glamour. And with Venus, it's massive glamour and wealth. The illusions of this world, what it gives. Fame and fortune, money, wealth, but the loss of family, the turbulence, the loss in love, marriages, divorce, separation from children. But it all came full circle and a healing in the end. So Roger Moore had such a magnificent life, And astrologically, you can see all of the determinants of his experiences and his life talents, wealth, profession, everything's here in the chart. So with that, I'd like to close. If you would like more information on me, you can always go to my website, which is galacticcenter.org, but a transcript of this entire workup of Roger Moore's chart is in my magazine, which is astrologicmagazine.com. Thank you.